Welcome, I'm Brian Schwagerl. Thank you for joining us for this talk with professors from the Schack Institute. I have a very special guest today. It's Tom Ortinau, and he not only serves as head of acquisitions for a great firm, GFP, that is expanding within life sciences, but he also teaches right here at Schack in the graduate school. And he's had an interest in life sciences for quite some time. And we're going to have a really interesting discussion with him on how do you plan and design life science clusters within the New York community? Where did this interest in life sciences come from? And why does everybody want to join the party today? So let me give you a little bit of Tom's background. He joined GFP in 2014 to lead the firm's property acquisition efforts. Tom has since been instrumental in making over 10 investments comprising over $1 billion. Tom also handles leasing, asset management, and development activities for GFP's projects. Prior to joining GFP, Tom was a member of the U.S. transactions team at PGIM Real Estate, where he handled Northeast acquisitions and development activities for the firm's private equity funds. At PREI, he handled 34 investments comprising over $5.5 billion in private equity funds. These property and entity level investments were made via common equity, preferred equity, and mezzanine debt positions, both on a direct basis and through joint ventures. Tom began his career at WSP Group, a leading design and construction firm in New York. At WSP, Tom worked on design and construction of over 50 public and private development projects, including one that's close to my heart, the Hearst Tower. Tom was one of the early instrumental people for the construction of the Hearst Tower and the New York Times building, as well as, I believe, the redesign of the Plaza Hotel, not the original design of the Plaza Hotel, right? Okay. Well, he holds a BSE from the University of Kansas and an MS from NYU and an MBA from Columbia Business School. And as I told you, he teaches here at Schack as well as heading up acquisitions for GFP. No spare time, Tom. I'm so happy you're able to join us today and squeeze us in between your acquisitions and teaching responsibilities. Tom, tell us a little bit about life sciences. Why is it hot? You know, I know New York City under the Bloomberg administration, and before that in prior administrations, tried to generate interest in life sciences and offer tax incentives, et cetera. But man, it's booming right now, isn't it? Everybody wants to join you in the party.
Thank you for the wonderful introduction, Brian. And yes, it is quite a party in the life science world. It's certainly getting a lot of attention right now, that's for sure. So where to start? I think I'll just try to answer your question about kind of what's happening, why everyone's excited about it. So I mean, it's a confluence of factors, like anything, that leads to people getting interested in something. I think that the kind of headline issue is that if you think about where, I mean, real estate really provides a service for users, right? So tenants who need a home, or whether they be academic or where someone lives, or where someone shops. So thinking about where real estate is going is so a way to sort of think about where the industry might go is where do you think industry may go in the future, right? So you think about the way people live their lives and the way that potentially their jobs may advance in the future. Healthcare is a place where a tremendous amount of advancement is still to be made in our world, right? So think about all the drug discoveries, DNA reading and writing, everything from, obviously coronavirus is a kind of an immediate example, but there's always so many people who are trying to advance the bar, in terms of like technology for healthcare. So there's a lot of anticipation around where that's going. This has been playing out over the last couple decades, mostly in other cities. Boston is probably the leading market for life science in the country, but a lot of it occurs, there's a lot of life science base in the West Coast as well, San Francisco Bay Area, San Diego, LA. and also the Research Triangle down in North Carolina. So this has been playing out in other places where essentially scientists have been advancing many technologies across the board and growing these companies. Interestingly enough, for New York, New York has had challenges in the past for why it hasn't really bloomed here like it has in those places, despite some headline kind of fundamental reasons it should feel like it should exist here. So, you know, I think the most widely cited reason is that that people would expect life science to be here is that this is where a lot of basically academic research in life science occurs. New York City is has been consistently the second largest receiver of NIH funding in the country, behind Boston. You know, for quite a long time running. New York City has some of the most leading academic research institutions. So whether it's NYU, Columbia, Rockefeller University, Weill Cornell, Mount Sinai. So a tremendous amount of this research occurs here. There's also just the general fundamentals for, you know, talent. You know, you don't have to go too far, but, you know, I think Richard Florida is the one who wrote the book on, you know, the creative class. You know, there's all kinds of reasons that young, dynamic, and sort of well-educated folks want to be here, right? So there's a lot of, there's a conflict of factors why it seems that life science should really happen here. Some of the obstacles that have held it back are really the, you know, competition from other uses and lack of, you know, incumbent developers that know how to build that type of use.
So do you think this is our time that when New York City can compete with Boston or San Diego? Certainly the weather's not in our advantage versus San Diego, but I'd put our hospital corridor against any major hospital infrastructure in America, especially since we've advanced and reinforced it over the last couple of years. Yeah.
I mean, I think that's all right. I mean, there's a reason we're doing this project, right? So we're a believer in the thesis that this is going to be successful in New York City. But as anyone who's involved in real estate investing would appreciate, is that it's very hard to make these investments without a precedent transaction that people can point to get comfort that the project will be a success, right? So with no prior industry really existing here, it was incredibly hard to get even the first project off the ground. So the Bloomberg administration worked with Alexandria to basically launch the first project about a decade ago. That project was ended up being very successful, but it was very, very challenging of a project for Alexandria, you know, to pull off. It put a lot of stress on their balance sheet at the time and created a lot of risk. Ultimately, that project happened, and it's sort of pointed to as something that has gotten us comfortable and others, but getting that going was hard.
For those in the audience that may not be familiar with it, that was built down by Bellevue, right? And one tower went up, the second tower went up, and there is a proposal possibly for a third tower to go up. But in their case, Alexandria had quite a lot of experience in life sciences. Even though they're based in the Midwest, they're one of the largest life science providers as a landlord in America. And we're hoping they expand here in New York. GFP had no life science background. How do you get into that? And, you know, we talked about the corridor, you know, along First Avenue for all the hospitals. You end up building your cluster, and we could talk about that in a little bit, in Long Island City, of all places, a place that Amazon picked as one of the best places to expand in, but then New York City, unfortunately, didn't receive them quite as well as expected.
Yeah, so maybe I'll give you a snapshot of how GFP got into it. So I helped the Gorals buy, so we own a lot of garment buildings in Midtown, and we've a lot of garment center tenants live on sort of a thin margin. So as the rents were going up in Midtown, they were getting compressed, essentially relocated to Long Island City. And, you know, we had long-standing relationships with a lot of these tenants, so we wanted to start buying buildings in Long Island City so we could, you know, keep them as tenants, essentially. So in the summer of 2016, I helped acquire a property 43-01 22nd Street. It's a 210,000 square foot concrete warehouse in Long Island City. And literally within months or maybe 2 months of acquiring the property, we were approached by some tenants who were looking to rent space, some life science tenants who wanted to rent space from us. Apparently one of our competitors who was trying to buy the building had a lab plan and negotiated some LOIs. And so there was some history, some momentum behind that leasing plan before we bought the building. After doing some initial research, I realized that, our $80 million redevelopment plan was going to be a $150 million life science plan. And it's just inappropriate to, buy a building with an office plan and then just say, oh, just kidding, I'm going to make it a lab. Can you give me another, whatever, a whole bunch of money? So we didn't pursue that building as a lab project, but I spent a lot of time learning about it. I learned that there was this nascent demand in New York City. I learned that it was very hard for tenants to find space, and many of those tenants were actually leaving New York City. They just couldn't find space, so they had to go find space in Boston or.
So these are tenants
Carolina.
that were coming out of biolabs or incubation space that wanted to grow, but they had no place to grow within New York. And
Yeah,
you
so
did
this
that
is
for
before.
your own research, right, Tom? This is your own light bulb going off and connecting the dots.
Well, I mean, everything in your real estate, you rely on your network to help you navigate things. So I certainly wasn't the, wizard in the ivory tower sort of with, pontificating about what the future would be. There were basically life science tenant reps who were deep in the space and had good relationships with these tenants, and introduced them to me. And I went out to dinner with these folks, and I met with the city to try and understand the city's perspective and the various programs that they had. The city has a great team at the EDC that's focused on this and trying to bring it to the city, bring this to the real estate community in New York. The partnership in New York helped me. Kathy Wild has a wonderful group over there that's done a lot of work along these lines. And from there, I met with, maybe half a dozen tenants. And from there, I went and met some, other developers who had done this type of work. And I think my Zoom seems to have frozen a little bit.
That's okay. We can hear you. So let's just keep talking and you'll catch up.
Okay, fair enough. So anyway, so I met some other.
I love how you're explaining how you built your network, how you went out and met with people over a cup of coffee or lunch and just pick their brains to get a better understanding of an industry that you thought could have a leg up in the property that you had just purchased.
Yeah. So I certainly leverage that network. I certainly do on a regular basis for all of the transactions that we do. So anyways, one of the things I've learned is that life science is a fairly complicated execution. It really requires, to do the right job, requires a lot of experience, with these types of buildings. GFP, we have a great development team, and I'm sure we would have sort of, as people say, figured it out. But I think we're more inclined to make sure it's a Class A, excellent project as opposed to kind of a good enough project, if that makes sense.
Well,
So,
Tom, we lost your photo and your handsome face. Let's see if you can bring up your slides and take us through the Long Island City project that you put together and the process that it took.
Sure. I'm trying to restart my Zoom here. I'll do my best to get that back up.
Okay.
Let me see here. I guess while I'm trying to pull this up, try to tell the story about it. So anyways, I met with King Street. They were a group that really kind of held my hand, but we worked together to figure out what kind of the right place to do this would be. And we liked Long Island City because
your development
it had
partner?
Yes, King Street Properties is the group that we're building the project with.
Right.
And so there's a number of factors that are very important for building lab projects. One of them is, essentially very good public transit. So, people can get there easily. Also, the buildings need to have a certain infrastructure. So in industrial buildings, especially the concrete warehouses that exist in Long Island City, lend themselves very well to that type of use, that type of redevelopment. Also, the economics are better in Long Island City. You can acquire a property, basically the property that's vacant for, somewhere around $250 to $350 a square foot. And at the time, you just could not do that in Manhattan. Other things, you need loading that you have in Long Island City that you don't have in Manhattan. You just really can't do a lab building without it. Just trying to think. There's other factors too. I mean, just Long Island City has a cool factor that perhaps other neighborhoods don't have. So, anyways, we thought the right sort of confluence of factors was there. The EDC that provided a lot of subsidy for the project also was very much in favor of supporting development to the boroughs. So they were, they were inclined to give us a better incentive package for doing something out there.
So one of our listeners asked if you could talk a little bit about the underwriting process and how underwriting for life science buildings differs from other sector types in terms of lease structure, tenant diligence, et cetera.
Sure. So underwriting, I mean, I'll just talk about the investment underwriting. So there's two sort of sides of the equation. One is the cost side, and the other is the, what income you can generate. I guess the riskiness of the returns you have to generate for your investors is another factor. So from a cost perspective, the cost to build a lab building in New York City are very high. You're easily at $600 to $800 per square foot over your acquisition cost to renovate a building for this use. If you're going to go ground up, you're talking at least $1,300, probably $1,300 to $1,800 a square foot of construction cost on top of your land cost. The rents within the space are fairly high. They're higher than one would be used to in other sectors. So I would say that generally speaking, there isn't that vibrant a market, so I try not to be too prescriptive around what the rents are. But the kind of higher end rents in Manhattan are in the kind of $105 to $115 a square foot triple net. And the rents in other places, so Long Island City, we're getting traction in the mid 80s per square foot triple net. Harlem is in this kind of mid 70s. It's unclear what the rents would be outside of the city, but there's places in New Jersey that rent in the 20s and 30s per square foot. The returns that investors require have varied. A lot of that has to do with the perceived risk of the space, but we're building our project to about a 9% yield on cost. It's unclear what the kind of stabilized cap rate may be, but we expect it to be somewhere in the 5 to 6% range. So hopefully that helps. The operating cost to run one of these buildings is fairly high. You're easily talking. So if your rents are $100 a square foot, your real estate taxes could be $25, $30, and your operating costs are probably $15 a foot. I'd say they're fairly common operating costs to an office building, but the utilities are materially higher. You're probably talking, rather than $2 a square foot of electric, you're looking at $6 to $8 a square foot of electric, and the gas costs are higher, like the fuel and water, sewer, and so forth. So it's pretty expensive to run one of these things.
You found a good target, and you were able to convince your partners that this is a place that you thought they should invest in. Was it a hard sell, since there weren't very many people in Long Island City doing this at the time, or did it become something that seemed like a no-brainer? And right now, I think you're close to leasing up, but tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So I would never use the word. I try to stay away from the phrase "no-brainer" and for what I do. So that's definitely not the way I would describe it. But What I would say is it's kind of an anecdote that people say. They'd rather, describing a real estate project as sort of like a drive down the highway. They'd rather be driving through the jungle with someone who's very good, like a haunted jungle with a very experienced party, than just driving down the clear fairway with someone who has less experience, right? So I would say the perception of executing on this plan in New York City is the risk perception is quite high, to the point of being almost like, flip a coin whether it's going to be a wipeout or a huge success. So that's not usually what resonates with investors. However, GFP has a very good reputation that I certainly use to raise capital, and then also our partner King Street has a wonderful reputation as well for, kind of always doing the right thing and being successful. So those two things helped us a lot. We ended up having many investors who are inclined to invest with our project, but it was not an over the weekend type equity raise. It was, it probably took us whatever 4 to 6 months to circle our equity. We had choices for sure, but yeah.
Well, I think
I would say
investors now looking for a stable place to put their money during the pandemic are definitely looking at industrial and life sciences properties. But not everyone can accomplish what you've accomplished, even though there are a number of people that are rushing into this sector. Do you think that we're better prepared developers will succeed in this realm, or that there's lots of room to grow as the cities comes back post-pandemic and they realize the brain power that gets produced out of our universities and the affordable housing that eventually can be found in places like Long Island City?
Yeah, so I guess the long way of saying, do I think this is going to be a vibrant market, and are others going to be successful? I do think it's going to be there's a number of folks who are trying to do this in the city. I think many will succeed. I think there's going to be a few clusters in New York City. There's the First Avenue, call it the Bed 10 Alley cluster. That's kind of around the 29th Street project that Alexandria built. There are some other projects that are percolating around there. Deerfield's project on Park Avenue South is sort of within that sphere of influence, if you will. There is a small cluster that's forming on the west side of Manhattan. Himmel-Maringoff has a project over there. Taconic has 2 projects over there. Others have been, trying to get some things together. There's a cluster forming in Long Island City, as you mentioned. There are 3 or 4 projects that are planned over there. So we have a project. Alexandria has their project in Long Island City. Botanic and King Street are working on a project as well. And there are others that are rumored. But so life science is a challenging thing. So I'm very happy that we decided to co-GP with King Street and sort of draft off their expertise. I think it would be hard to just jump into it without someone like that on your team, though.
All right, well, your picture was restored. Thank you very much. Do you want to move over to your deck that you've prepared?
Sure. Let me see if I can collapse my. I'll go ahead and see if I can open this up. It looks like I'm not. I need to be given the host.
Oh, I thought we did that with you already, but we'll go back and do that now. Let's see. Participants. There we go. More. Oh, I know what it was. You came back on another screen, so that's how that. Here we go. You're a co-host.
Okay, good stuff. All right, so I'll do my best to flip through this deck in a timely fashion. Brian, just feel free to stop me, or anyone can raise their hand if they have questions.
Sure, and I'll remind people,
it.
if you have a question, you can add it in the chat, or and I'll be happy to bring it up to you. So right now, Tom's going to talk about this life science cluster in Long Island City that he's put together. And why a cluster? Why is that important, Tom? Explain to the people that are listening in that idea. And we talked about how there's the cluster down by Bellevue, where Alexandria is, and now there's a cluster in Harlem, mostly centered around where the Columbia Engineering School and the development in that area happened and is expanding from the Bloomberg administration to today. And now an interesting phenomena on the far west side of Manhattan that I believe is sort of geared towards pharma, possibly crossing over from New Jersey through the tunnel and making their way up the west side. But why don't you tell us a little bit about why a life science cluster makes sense?
Sure. So I would say in general, clustering is a phenomena that occurs in basically the commercial office space. It happens in other sectors too, retail, even residential. For example, the financial services industry clustered in New York City's Plaza District. It looks like my Zoom might be going out again.
But
just
I'll keep going.
Try to answer your question.
Fine.
Okay, wonderful. So there's a cluster of technology companies in the Midtown South in New York City. There's a cluster of technology companies in, for example, Silicon Valley in California. So it's very common for industries to want to cluster. A lot of that is just, there's certain anchors that occur. So for example, Google is a major anchor in New York City's Midtown South market. Other small tech companies want to be close to Google because, every founder essentially wants to sell themselves to Google, right? So what ends up happening in life science is the same. So Kendall Square in Cambridge is probably the biggest cluster in the country. It's something along, it's about 10 million square feet about 4 years ago. I want to say it's probably a little bit bigger now. If you think about the actual employees of these companies, life science companies for the most part are startups. They're going to be coming and going, being bought and sold and kind of formed and shut down. So these people are constantly recruiting, trying to get to know each other, whether it's for raising capital or recruiting or just keeping tabs on what the next best technology may be. So there's a strong affinity to be employed within the cluster, and that draws in companies. So our vision, essentially, it's kind of like the ideal outcome of our project and our efforts is for us to help establish like a Kendall Square South in Long Island City.
Oh, nice. All right, take us through it, Tom. Let's go.
Okay, good stuff. So this is a picture of the building that we acquired. These are the three companies, Modern Meadow, Cellmatics, and Biolabs, that showed up. It sounds like, Brian, you're familiar with Biolabs. They're kind of like a WeWork, if you will, for life science.
And it's interesting. We
Yeah.
had a question regarding the WeWork of it just came up, the WeWork of science buildings. Can you please tell us a little about some of the new models that are emerging, such as co-working with scientists, and how they're able to build off the capital and resources in this cluster? Sure.
So, I'll show you. There's a slide I have that kind of shows the life cycle of a life science company. So this kind of called diagram shows the life cycle, or kind of it's an approximation of a life cycle of a life science tenant. So oftentimes they form within universities. NIH funding goes to a senior academic person who's got research. They form an idea, and if that idea is successful, they'll basically graduate from the research environment to like a biolabs. And biolabs is a place where you can rent basically single desks like you can at WeWork. You can rent benches, in the lab, and office desks as well. So that is the kind of startup sector right here. If they're successful, they'll raise Series A, B, and C, and whatnot, and they'll grow from two employees to perhaps 10 or more employees. Once they reach a certain level, they leave the incubator and go into what's called a graduation space. There are other companies called My Labs is a big one in Boston.
Mm-hmm.
There's not that many graduation incubators in New York City yet, but they're circling New York City. And then they would get the good thing about graduation space is you don't have to go all in for your really expensive gear that you need. So the $1 million microscope or the deep freezers or the place where you do various testing. So those things are very expensive. VC capital is very precious. So those companies can kind of scale more quickly and efficiently for their capital in graduation incubator space. If they're successful thereafter, they'll either be acquired or go public. Many of them get acquired by big pharma or something along those lines.
And again, this is the goal of the Economic Development Corporation and the tax credits and incentives that they offer, that these businesses grow jobs and hopefully some of them will stay here. And I guess in your life science cluster, the idea is that you could move them to a building within that cluster that can accommodate that growth, correct?
Yeah, yes, exactly. But
we lost your slides, unfortunately, Tom. I don't know if you know that. You froze up again on your screen and then lost. We'll have to boost your internet connection there and working out of. I'm sure your lab that you're building will have the utmost connection forward. So you told us a little bit of how you raised money. You told us a little bit of how you networked and found partners. And now you're telling us what the growth scenario is. What else differentiates you from all these other clusters that are starting about? Sure.
So I would say our conviction is that Long Island City has the right ingredients for success here. So the big issue in Manhattan, for example, I think everyone who lives in New York City can recognize that if you move here, you're going to there's a preference to work in Manhattan. But there's a fundamental reason that we think exists in Long Island City that you just can't replicate in Manhattan, and that's a clustering opportunity. There's just a greater density and variety of buildings that are kind of underdeveloped in that neighborhood that we think have great potential for life science development, and we'll be able to create. That density will get more demand, and that demand will sort of there'll be a network effect, and it will strengthen thereafter. And there's other good things too. Good access to good food, entertainment, culture, reasonably priced housing. Commuting there is easy. So there's a number of factors.
Unlike other office jobs, you really can't work a lab in your home, right? So it's kind of pandemic proof moving forward if we were to invest in sciences, and it certainly seems that at least one of the things that this pandemic has taught us is that we do as a country need to invest more in sciences. Is it your impression that there'll be additional funding on a national level to do more experimentation, to push forward ideas on life sciences production?
Yes, I think so. I think fortunately, the U.S. government has this really great program, the NIH funding program.
Yeah, I'd like you to kind of explain that a little bit to our audience. I think that's really a fascinating growth mechanism for this industry.
Sure. So I don't know exactly where the program started and all that, but I believe it's sort of a corollary of DARPA, which is the federal government's initiative to invest in technologies to help can basically make sure that the U.S. remains a forward-leading developer of technology, which will create more industries and maintain competitive nature into the future. The National Institute of Health is also called NIH, is a group that writes tens of thousands of grants every year. Most of those grants go to, well, I'd say maybe half and half between academic and private industry. So, every major research university, whether it's the ones I mentioned in New York or UCLA or Stanford University, UNC Chapel Hill, I'm sure Harvard and MIT get their fair share as well. They do research and basically they write grants, and every year there's, I want to say it's $18 billion is given out. New York City captures around 10% of it. I think it's actually more like 12% now. So we get about $2 billion. I think we may have gotten $2.3 billion this year. Boston is the number one receiver of those monies. I want to say they received about $2.7 billion last year. Thereafter, it's California and the Research Triangle down in North Carolina. It gets a lot as well. So anyways, this money funds early stage kind of technology formation and research. And yeah, that is one of the major reasons that the United States remains such a competitive place for the development of life science technologies. Thereafter, if things are successful and marketable, the private investment world takes over. So venture capital funding kind of goes from angel funding, VC funding, the various rounds thereafter, to private equity and then public markets. So that's directionally how
the city sees this, is trying to incentivize developers like you to work in neighborhoods in Long Island City to get these type of buildings built. Let's talk about the zoning, though. I mean, we talked about when we did have pictures of your building up there briefly. It looked like an older industrial building that was on the site there. Is there do you believe there's a need now for an as-of-right tool to develop these type of facilities? Do we have manufacturing facilities that could be repurposed in the right way? Because you've mentioned the loading zones and the floor plates and the heights that are needed. But are there other things that we should be looking for the next mayor or the state to be doing to help developers such as yourself moving forward?
It's a great question. I would say from a zoning perspective, it's not just zoning that makes a building appropriate or a location appropriate for lab. There are certain features that certain buildings, take a step back. Manufacturing zoning in New York City is sort of an as-of-right place where you can put lab. You can also do it. The city came out with a memo, I want to say it came out maybe 4 years ago, that clarified that you could do lab in commercial districts. So that sort of expanded the sort of territory that you could do this in, and also made people more comfortable that there wouldn't be any regulatory issues. But just because a building theoretically has the right zoning doesn't necessarily mean it's built the right way to accommodate this use. So just simple example, many of the buildings in outside of New York City and also in Long Island City are sort of squat buildings. They're 4 to 6 stories tall. They're relatively big floor plates. They have great loading. You could back like 4 different semis into the loading dock. Those buildings work really well for lab space. Lab buildings have a significant amount of HVAC systems that they essentially, like in an office building like where I'm sitting right now, the fresh air that I'm kind of getting out of my HVAC system is only 20% of the air. So 80% is recirculated. In a life science building, 100% of the air is fresh. So yeah. You've got 5x the air handling. So
a lot of that is health and safety reasons, right? The chemicals that you're dealing with, the exhaust purposes, and go back to what you mentioned one of the great impediments of these buildings is the amount of energy that they consume for all that mechanical systems, correct?
Exactly. Yeah. So when you have these sort of heroic HVAC systems, the ductwork ends up being just very, very meaningful. So as you can imagine, if you have a large, like a tall office building, the higher you go in the building, the ductwork just gets bigger and bigger because it kind of truncates as you get down to the bottom. So the taller the building gets, the more of your floor plate gets eaten up by this HVAC system, and it just becomes, inefficient to do it in a tall building. Other than that, the ceiling heights want to be very high. So ideally, you have 15-foot plus ceiling heights. And typically, it's uncommon that you would have an office building with that kind of ceiling height. So a typical office building in Manhattan is 11.5 to 13.5 feet tall, which would be short for this type of use. And also the loading is not acceptable. So imagine trying to back like 2 semis into a garage on West 38th Street, right? It's just not going to happen. So there's a reason that many of the buildings that are done lab in Manhattan tend to be on the west side of basically on the highways on the perimeter of the city. So if you notice, Alexandria's tower has a humongous kind of, they basically have their own on-ramp off the highway. So those things do exist in Long Island City. It has exactly the right building type, loading, zoning, all those things that you can cluster. So that's one of the advantages over there that you don't have in Manhattan.
What about the manufacturing side of this? I don't know if yours is more laboratory and office space, correct? And then also learning facilities in terms of being able to have that collision of ideas of scientists and workers together to be able to discuss things and kind of have those brainstorming moments. But has the pandemic pushed things along and technology along in a way that robotics is used more often? And do we have the type of buildings that can sustain that production, or is that still too expensive in a place like Long Island City and more suited for somewhere cheaper upstate, if at all, maybe out Midwest?
That's a good question. I feel like that's a little over my pay grade to comment on biomanufacturing and robotics and things like that. I would say that, so you're right, that our building is basically an R&D facility. It's a Cambridge style wet lab building where people could do life science research. About 50% of the space will be office and 50% will be lab space. Up in Boston, our partner King Street is building what's basically biomanufacturing facilities. Many of those, my understanding is that they're kind of located in the suburbs. They describe it as the next frontier. So I don't know if they've exactly said, the market has sort of figured out the right, mix of requirements and things like that and so forth. But it wouldn't surprise me if the right ingredients are there for the economics to work in Long Island City. I think there is an advantage to being able to, have the great proximity. So if you're doing the research, walk across the bridge and go to call it the factory district in Long Island City, where perhaps you have more manufacturing type things. I mean, there's a lot of, your imagination can just take you to where, in the future, you're kind of like swabbing your mouth. Say you have perhaps early onset of Alzheimer's or something like that. Someone can swab your mouth, drive in a car over to this biomanufacturing facility, do some mRNA. Sorry, this is conjecture on my part. But
that's okay.
You can imagine like they're coming up with kind of bespoke solutions, whether they be like DNA type treatment, whether it's a chemical type treatment, or perhaps a prosthetic. Maybe it's a combination of all those. And they kind of assemble things in a kind of a bespoke way over in the factory district where the research is happening in Court Square. So, obviously the patients are in Manhattan or throughout the city.
Well, we have a question from the audience talking about the specialization of CRE. So you mentioned you worked with a broker in the area that kind of helped you formulate ideas and bring tenants to you. How do you see the growth of these alternative sectors? It's a two-part question from Antonio Garcia. He wants to know, what is the potential life science that can have on the industry? And I'm guessing he means the real estate industry. And what other niche sectors do you see evolving akin to life sciences?
So life science, it's funny, a friend of mine who's our partner from Carlisle, the Carlisle group on our InnoLabs project, they said that essentially niche industries are now the kind of like the main industry, right? So the primary industries used to be office, retail, industrial, you know, maybe and residential, and maybe you throw a hotel in that mix. But now the niche industry, the niche property types, whether they be data centers, storage, medical office, corporate housing, you know, student housing, senior housing, go on and on. And life science would be kind of that kind of niche suite of kind of real estate sectors. Those sectors are getting a lot of attention right now. I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that people are, you know, the way that we live our lives is changing, and real estate is changing to accommodate the new way we live our lives. Some of the hottest sectors right now are just along those lines, right? Data centers. Obviously, it's incredibly important for the amount of online activity that occurs, whether it's, you know, video or communications of any sort. Life science to advanced medical technology, and industrial. And I don't have to explain to you what's happening in the industrial space. So I think it's just a corollary of what's happening, you know, in our personal lives.
Yeah, you know, Tom, I'm a big believer that a picture is worth 1,000 words. Is any way we can get your slide deck up and you could show your beautiful work, or are we just having technical difficulties here?
Yeah, I'm happy to try.
Yeah, well, we could try while we're talking. You're holding your own in the conversation, that's for sure.
Oh my gosh.
We
you
are
have to give me the host thing again.
Yeah. Okay. And I guess they want to know what kind of amenities that your tenants are asking for. And I know that you put a lot of time and effort into the amenities within the site that you're working on. Okay, there we go. We can get an extended version. I think it was because I added you as a co-host. Let's try again. I'm gonna make you a host. How's that? We'll get you premier host. See if that helps.
Okay, wonderful. All right, let's see here. Try to share my screen. Okay.
There we go.
Fingers crossed that this we can actually make it through here.
Sure, you're doing great. I appreciate your efforts. Oh, there, that shows us the different alternatives that we discussed earlier. Take us to the amenities, Tom. Take us to a picture of the building and what you're thinking about doing.
Sure. My last slide shows some renderings of what the building looks like. I mean, I'll just show you a video. Maybe that'll show pretty well.
Okay, let's see how that works. I'm an eternal optimist, so I'm sure it's going to work now.
Good stuff. All right, so here's my video.
I think you have to share your sound.
Let me see if I can figure out a way to share my sound. Share sound. There it is.
Excellent.
Okay, there you go. So hopefully that gave you a sense. It's like a Batman video. So dramatic.
That worked. That was good. See, you're a scientific wonder already. What I was noticing most about that is the number of spaces that allowed for interaction between the people working in the lab. All of the light and air and the views of Manhattan that you got from the higher floors. So you're all in on Long Island City. Explain to me how that came about, because if this works on top of some of the other investments that are going on, we could see a huge explosion in Long Island City, which was ultimately what Mayor Bloomberg had hoped, after moving forward with Cornell Tech and the incentives that were offered over here, and all of the new residential that's gone up there.
Yeah, no, we're a big believer. Like I said, I think it's a confluence of things. I do think that there would be multiple clusters that form in the city. I don't know why this is, but it's just a matter of, I think the best confluence of factors that will make it successful exists in Long Island City. It's a great economic, like the basis, so the rents that you can offer is most compelling there. The transportation is excellent. The building stock lends itself to this type of conversion very well. And the chance that you can build a series of buildings within a small area is very high there. There's so much competition and density in Manhattan that it seems unlikely that you would actually be able to pull off a true cluster in Manhattan. So we think it'll be, yeah.
Yeah, let's talk about competition for a while, particularly among the hospitals, right, and the clusters that we talked about. There used to be a lot of infighting, right, and scientists are sort of closed in some ways to their own experiments, and but the new science moving forward really has to be a shared science. Have you found in dealing in this industry a breaking down of the silos and more of a partnership moving forward, a true mission of what it is that you hope to accomplish, which would be really something, I mean, even for you as a real estate developer, and I don't mean that in a demeaning way, right? I mean, it adds a sense of purpose, mission, and a feeling that you're accomplishing something for the common good in this type of development that you're putting forward, correct?
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. So yeah, one of the big challenges that New York City had was that the research institution, there was very little crossover or collaboration, if you will, between the big universities. They worked within their own silos and they competed with one another for those NIH dollars and for recognition and things like that. I think that the New York Genome Center that Nancy Kelly and Michael Bloomberg helped pull together was probably one of the first collaborations, if you will, between the major research houses in New York City. The New York Genome Center is located at 101 of the Americas. It's in Eddie Minskoff's building down in Hudson Square. So all the major houses came together, and by house, I mean Columbia University, Rockefeller, Weill Cornell, NYU, and so forth. I believe it's 8 universities came together, and they share an incubator space down there. And there's, presentation space where people can, present their ideas and raise capital and so forth. And it's a real community down there. That was, I want to say that lease was signed in 2011 or something like that. And it's been a real success, about 175,000 square foot space. So that was like one of the initial collaborations, if you will. And there's also one of the other things that was difficult for New York City was there wasn't really much. So up in Boston, for example, it's very common for a professor at MIT to also have a company. So they'll teach during the day, and they'll have a company where they're essentially, trying to bring to market their various technologies. And it's a very fluid kind of experience or interaction between the private sector and institutions. That until very recently, that just did not exist in New York City. So it was very institutionally oriented.
Yeah.
So now we're sort of breaking down that.
Yeah,
those
and
barriers.
you're living it. You're showing how to teach in the evening and how to work and be a developer during the day. But following up on that question, we had an interesting write-up by Steve Rosa, who wants to ask you what opportunities for public-private partnership investments might be possible either on municipal land or your thinking moving forward. That structure would seem to be obvious, he says, as a way to develop something possibly in Manhattan or other places historically around the city. What's your thinking on that? And thank you for your question, Steve Ross. We have about a few more minutes left, so if anyone else has any questions, please get them in now, because Tom has a busy schedule and we'll be moving on shortly.
So yes, thanks, Steve. There is a vibrant kind of a framework, if you will, that where public-private partnerships are explored in this sector. Our project is actually a partnership with the EDC, which is sponsored by the city and kind of overseen by the mayor's team. So we ended up getting a 20-year tax abatement for this project, which was really, really critical for the feasibility of our project. They also abated mortgage recording tax and sales taxes, which is common for the IDA programs. But that's one way that we work with them. Another way that the cities can kind of like help spur this development is by just giving grants to tenants in the space. It's very expensive to build some of these specialized spaces, so the cities provided capital for those things. You mentioned kind of like, you know, building labs on city-owned land. I would say I haven't seen a piece of land that the city owns that I feel like is really suitable for a lab development yet. So I think it's more likely that those kind of public-private partnerships more come along the lines of a tax abatement or just capital to the tenants. You know, perhaps if there's a way to, actually, I take that back. Alexandria's project on East 29th Street was the city contributed that land as well as the tax abatement. So that was a public-private partnership along those lines. I think most of them are going to be tax abatements. So,
yeah, one last question came in regarding capital. You mentioned it briefly, but one of the distinguishing factors for San Diego is their access to Silicon Valley and a lot of the angel investors that exist here. Has New York been able to maximize its closeness to financial services and some of the startup capital that can happen here? Are we getting a newfound awareness, and will that contribute to the growth of life sciences development in New York City moving forward?
Yeah, there's no shortage of capital in New York City. This is definitely the financial investment capital of the United States, if not the world. So that certainly does help. Some of the most prominent life science investors are based in New York City. Deerfield is probably the most prominent. They have a humongous, I want to say it's an $8 billion venture capital fund. I didn't even know if that was possible to have that kind of money in a VC fund, but they are active in the city and they're looking to grow their portfolio companies here. Arch Ventures is another. There's several venture capital firms that are based here that want to invest here as well. So that will certainly help. But there's also other sources of capital too. There's angel funding from wealthy individuals. New York City is #1 in the country for private donations, right? So imagine all the people who are donating money privately for cancer research or Alzheimer's research or, you know, to various research universities. New York City has a huge amount of donation capital which really flows into things like this. So it's not just VC money.
Well, you certainly gave us a lot to think about, a lot of optimism in a post-COVID world. You are certainly taking advantage of the opportunities that are here in New York City. And we want to thank you for introducing your innovative platform here on the InnoLabs of Long Island City to our students. And especially want to thank you as a professor full-time for graduate students in the Schack Institute of Real Estate. You do an outstanding job, Tom, and I know on behalf of your fellow professors, we want to thank you.
I right. Well, I appreciate you having me, Brian. This is really fun. I think it's important that the students have this, kind of access to practitioners, and I'm really happy to be part of it. So,
any last minute career advice or ways that students can reach out to you moving forward?
Sure. My information is on our website. I'm happy to share that through you, Brian, or however makes sense. Folks are welcome to reach out. Career-wise, I mean, it's kind of strange times right now. Usually, the way that I recommend people, kind of find their way in our industry is to network their way through. So there's probably a way to continue doing that. You just have to figure out how to navigate that in the virtual world. Hopefully we'll be out of this virtual world and back in the in-person world soon. So I would say networking is absolutely critical. It's something that I probably allocate a good 10 to 20% of my time in that fashion, even though I've been in the industry for 20 years. So it's a lifetime exercise, and I strongly recommend that folks who want to have a career in this industry get after that, spend a lot of time and invest in that. I strongly recommend people who, whether you're an investment person or an execution person, try to get a well-rounded background. That's a good way to, just understand how to navigate the process of investing or development or leasing. There's a lot of different people involved, and the kind of more nimble you can be, I think the more helpful you can be in terms of being effective. My general advice is to try and get to work for a big company where you can kind of become a known quantity, get really great experience, get a lot of reps. So repetitions and working on many, many projects is critical to building that strength. And then at least what I've done, at some point you have to figure out if you're a paycheck type person or if you're an entrepreneur. And I think a lot of people are very entrepreneurial in this industry. And I think it's easier to be an entrepreneur if you get that big company experience with a lot of repetition. So that's what I did myself. It's worked fine for me. And I recommend others who are inclined to be entrepreneurial take that path. Otherwise, I think it's just the basics. You want to work really hard. There's no substitute for hard work and doing good work. You want to have fun and have a good reputation, be someone that people want to work with. And I would say generally, the absolutely most important thing is you have to mind your reputation, whether it's doing the right thing for people. If you're investing capital, you have to make sure that you remember that it's someone's retirement money that you're putting to work, whether it's the lender's money or whether it's investors' equity. And if you don't take care of people in the right way, it won't treat you that well. So mind your reputation, but more important than anything else.
Well, you certainly treated us well today. I want to thank you once again, Tom, for spending time with us. This has been a delightful and very engaging and very enlightening faculty talk on life sciences development here in New York City. Thank you, and thank you to our audience. Look forward to new faculty talks every Wednesday. You can find them listed in your social media and also in our SHAC newsletter. Have a very good day, and everyone be safe. Take care, everyone.